Alright, this year I'm going to be on time. I've got my costume, my corn, my candy corn, and my popcorn. Oh, this watch party, it's going to be great. Welcome to this year's Halloween Scarathon. Tonight we will be spending time with some of my closest acquaintances, as well as you, dear viewer. Tonight we'll be watching some of the greatest horror movie classics of all time to get us in the spooky mood for this wonderful holiday. And while we wait for the others to arrive, how about we start off this Scarathon of terror with a story. I hope you all enjoy. Abandoned by Disney by Slimebeast. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real, live, ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on this place. Yes, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate, and there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work at regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of their story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it obviously wasn't because of foreigners or lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're familiar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you'd know it as a Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened, pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what it was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney's company actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative the project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, the gigantic Indian palace, surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear. Well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by the security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and the local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas. Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete, visitors actually stayed at the resort, and the surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then, it all just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this place to begin with. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so I really only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. And then I read this article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind. Things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking that place. People there just felt angry about the Treasure Island, and as folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock in the local waters and they closed, including the sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say that I wasted no time getting there, because honestly, it took me over a year after I first found out the Treasure Island article to get around to going up to the Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place. It had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place. Though that was to be expected since they had all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from the search results. Basically, for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather their words were just made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old-as-hell map I had received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World. And I guess, since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved into my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then, it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin that my parents had shoved it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth, tropical plants that had run rampant over the overpopulated area, mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sinos. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand-painted letters scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly the handiwork of some past local or employee who wanted to make a small protest. And the gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive, so grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed me the layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of this place were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood untended and ragged amongst piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood with their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was a sort of clash between order and chaos as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxiously tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. And what was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by the weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in the resort courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave toward no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin, and bird shit covered whole swaths of his fur, and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti, where the original paint had been peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they had been taken off of their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone had once again painted, "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you that all of the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace, forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, and a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal. Counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid the empty echo chamber that amplified me every step, like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was, as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances in space, no expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented, and the entire place smelled like very old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small that it almost was impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist and then carefully letting it go. But within seconds, it started to swing again. The public bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. And there was about a half-inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks and the bidets in the ladies' room, yeah, I went there, all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me they should have shut the water off long, long ago. And there were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked. I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing through the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on my mind. It sort of sounded like, "I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you." Look, I know, it sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced, and why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there and probably would have knifed me. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I had found anything of note and had wasted the trip up. And as I look out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Something that would have given me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 50 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on the pedestal right in the center of the area. And it was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell on the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the statue and snapped a photo. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another. And I moved closer again to get the detail of its face. Slowly, casually, Python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned, slithered off the pedestal, across the grass, and into the trees. A whole 50 feet of it. Its head long disappeared into the woods before the tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all of their exotic animals into the grounds. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I had read about the sharks at the Treasure Island. I should have known they'd have done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth, and I snapped shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way back into the building. I took a few deep breaths and slaps to my own face to get myself right into the head again after that. I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down, unless I wanted to recline on the broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself up onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs nearby the palace's lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean. Save for a startling accumulation of dust, I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I'd become so accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep it at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward, below ground level. And using my camera flash as a sort of improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. A sign on the door. A real sign. Read, "Mascots Only. Thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit, for two reasons. One, a Mascots Only area would have definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. 2, this padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or one only steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull some of the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of or hadn't been able to do all this time. The Mascots Only area was a startling and very welcome change for the rest of the building I had seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered or faded randomly. And also, nothing had been stolen or broken. Even if age and exposure weren't definitively taking their toll. Tables had notepads, pens, and there were clocks. Even a punch-in clock on the wall completed and filled with time cards. Chairs were scattered around there, and there was even a small break room with an old static-filled television and a long rotted-out food and drink on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in the state of evacuation. As I walked in the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the Mascots Only area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered and almost melded with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into the mush when I applied even the least amount of force. And clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was that the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of this place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled into it. The door wouldn't open at first, and I figured this was probably where the costumes were kept. And I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. And try as I might, whatever angle I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. And that was when I heard a slight popping sound and the door creaked open slowly. Inside the room was completely dark, pitch black, and I used the camera flash to look for a light switch on the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to just keep getting brighter and brighter until the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it would reach a critical stage, the lights dimmed and steadied. The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers, just hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers towards the back. What I had found odd and what I wanted to photograph right away was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur of the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even more odd, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse, black where he should be white, and white where he should be black. His normally red pants were a light blue. And the sight was off-putting enough that I had actually postponed photographing the thing until last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls, upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show that the entire room of frozen, putrid cartoon faces, some with the plastic eyes missing. And then I decided to stage a shot. Just one of the bed-wrangled character heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with affright. I looked down at my feet, and there, between my shoes, was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot's head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved to the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, you know? I had to, for a number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you didn't think it through. I needed to prove what had happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. This was why the resort had closed, and I was the only one outside the Disney Corporation who knew. Me. And that is when the Mickey, that photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. And the Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood there at the center of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled, "No," over and over again. With the shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite of the creature, now quietly sizing me up, head tilted. The digital camera's screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of that thing. It was a perfect silhouette of a Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen with wherever Mickey's outline moved to. And then the camera died, went black and quiet and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "You want to see my head come off?" And then it started pulling at its own head, working its clumsy, gloved-clad fingers around its neck with clawing, impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. It worked its digits into its neck. There's so much blood. So much thick, curdled, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard the sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. Only cared about getting away. Above the doorway of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal floors with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures off the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled from my sanity, if not my very life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. And they didn't want anything like that getting out. Well, at least I finally managed to start everything off without anything going wrong. Wait a minute. This isn't my house. Why am I in a boiler room? Oh no! I'm gonna miss this Scarathon. Let me see if I can get a hold of someone.
Hey, Stormy. What's up?
Hey, Raven. I, seem to have caught myself in a bit of a situation here. I think I'm going to be a few minutes late to the Scarathon.
That should be fine. How long do you think you'll be?
I'm, not sure yet. Is there any way you might be able to, entertain the viewers for just a few minutes? I think I hear something.
Welcome to my world, bitch.
Stormy? Stormy! Okay. Hello, everyone. Stormy seems to be preoccupied right now. How about a story while we wait for him? We danced, attributed to Smiles. Footsteps aren't an uncommon thing to hear when you're sitting in a basement, so I think nothing of it when I hear quiet thuds coming from my upstairs hallway. I just assume it's my brother and continue doing whatever pointless little thing I was doing at the time. They go on for another couple minutes, and I'm starting to get pissed off. They keep getting louder and louder. I sigh, wondering what the hell my brother was doing so late at night. I sit there because it's impossible to focus with the racket. I mean, it sounds like someone's power walking all over my main floor. I sit there and I listen as the thumps get faster and wilder. They just keep moving, almost starting to form a rhythm. They move even faster and get even wilder, and they're thumping all over my main floor. I realize that whatever this is, it can't be human. No human can move like that. What the hell? I finally yell. After that, all the noises stop. Everything is quiet for a moment, and then I hear calm, slow footsteps moving to my basement door. The door is pushed open, and the footsteps stop again. I listen to my breathing for the next 3 minutes, and then sigh, thinking it's over. Turns out, something else was listening too. Suddenly I hear it thudding down the stairs, and I knock my chair over in my haste to stand up. I start to run towards the nearest closet just in time to see a grotesque, hairless, four-legged creature dancing towards me, tapping its swollen feet in an intoxicating rhythm. I dive into the closet and slam the door shut. There's a half-second pause, and then I hear that same rhythm on the door. It just keeps going and going with no pause, no rests, no relief. He's been at it for hours now, and I find myself tapping my fingers along with his song. But then just as suddenly as it began, it ends. I wait for a few moments and then look out. He's gone. I flip on a light and I fall into a chair. It's safe. I relax, and I think for a few moments, but then I notice my foot tapping. Maybe this song isn't so bad. I almost like it enough to dance to it. So I drop down onto my hands and my feet, and I start dancing.
Looks like I'm going to be their Stormy now.
Come on, magic, come on, magic, come on, magic, come on, magic. No, yeah. Oh, thank Cthulhu. Oh, hey, it's not raining. I wonder if Raven's entertaining the guests okay. Let me see if I can get a hold of Ominous.
Hey, Stormy. Raven said you were going to be late to the watch party.
Yeah, I think I've managed to get myself trapped in horror movies. I just ran away from Freddy, and I'm not 100% sure where I am right now. Is there any way that you could keep an eye on the guests for a minute?
Yeah, that's no problem, but, who's that behind you?
Oh, it's Jason. That makes sense. I'm gonna go.
Alright, have fun. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Seeing as our host is preoccupied, allow me to entertain you with the story of my own. I put the bag of popcorn into the microwave and started the clock. They'll be here in a few minutes, so I should have the popcorn ready when they arrive. As I waited for the popcorn to finish, I silently checked off the things I needed for movie night. Movies? Check. Decorations? Check. Costume? Spooky as hell. Candy for trick-or-treaters? I glanced at the large bowl of chocolates before taking one. Check. Food? Pumpkin pie was... My train of thought was interrupted by a loud bang from the apartment beside mine. I lived in a split house, so my neighbors and I were only separated by a wall. I stood in silence, staring at the wall, listening for anything. After a few seconds, the microwave dinged, letting me know that the popcorn was finished. Pushing the strange noise out of my mind, I opened the microwave and took out the popcorn. The pie should be done in a few minutes, and everything seemed to be going perfectly fine. I poured the butter into the kernels and shook the bag well before pouring it into a bowl. After taking the pie out of the oven, I set it to cool. Well, all I need to do is wait for my guests to arrive. And arrive they do. I heard the doorbell ring not long after I set down the popcorn. Answering the door, I'm greeted by a killer clown and a nurse from Silent Hill. Sorry guys, I say. I'm not interested in any Girl Scout cookies, I joked. Yes you are. Now let us in, the clown said with a chuckle. I stepped aside, allowing them to enter, but as I do, I noticed my neighbor's lights weren't on. Strange. Did they not set up for tonight yet? I think back to the loud noise from before. Nah, they're probably fine. They've never missed a chance at Halloween before. I'm sure they're just running a bit late. Once my guests were inside, we chatted for a bit, talking about the normal BS, playing video games, and eating snacks while we waited for trick-or-treaters. As the doorbell rang, I got up and walked to the front door, picking up the bowl of candy by the counter and answering.
Trick or treat.
A tiny princess said with a wide smile. Behind her stood an adult Frankenstein and a witch to his side. I smiled and emptied a few chocolates into her bag along with a lollipop.
Thank you.
The young royal said before starting to walk back down the driveway, along with her royal guards. As they left, they walked straight past my neighbor's house. As I took a look, the lights still weren't on. Were they not participating this year? I guess not, all things considered. Coming back inside, me and my scary guests decided upon a movie to watch while we waited for trick-or-treaters. It was some cheesy flick about a ghost haunting a girl that looked just like her. Not bad, but certainly not good. As the heroine was about to notice the ghost in the reflection of her bathroom mirror, there was a loud bang, followed by screaming and the sound of glass breaking. It sounded muffled, and it seemed to be coming from behind the wall, from my neighbor's house. I paused the movie and waited for a second, listening for anything else. I slowly walked over to the wall. "Hey," I said, knocking on the door. "Is everything okay over there?" I asked. A deep voice replied,
"Yeah, we're fine. The little one just got scared from the movie we're watching."
I didn't recognize the voice. It certainly didn't sound like my neighbor Dan, but I'm assuming they were having guests over. That might explain why they didn't do anything for Halloween. I chuckled. "Alright, just making sure," I said before going back to the couch and continuing the movie. The rest of the night was quiet, just enjoying the movie and company while occasionally answering the door, giving out candy. After the movie, pie, and a couple of games, my evil acquaintances decided it was time to head home. "Alright guys, I'll see you later then," I said as I opened the door for them. "And drive safe, you don't know what kind of weirdos are out tonight." The clown laughed. "Weirder than us? Impossible." With a small laugh, I waved them goodbye, and then cleaned up the house before turning off the lights and heading to bed. I woke up to sirens outside. Groggily, I looked out my window, only to see 2 police cars outside, taping off my neighbor's house with caution tape. I quickly got changed as I heard a knock on the door. Opening it, I saw to no one's surprise a policeman. "Excuse me, ma'am. I have a few questions I'd like to ask you." They asked me if anything strange happened last night. Of course, I told them about the banging and screaming I'd heard, along with the mystery man. "I just thought it was Halloween stuff," I explained. The officer nodded and took note of what I had said on a notepad. I asked what was going on, but he told me that he couldn't disclose any information before leaving. It wasn't until I saw on the news later today that I found out. Last night, a home invader broke into the house and robbed them. Their daughter Nancy hid for hours until the man found her. She tried to escape while screaming, but the man caught her. And I was next door the whole time.
Well, at least I'm out of the forest now. Oh, hey, there's 2 priests.
Your mother sucks cocks in hell.
Okay, well, that's rude. Aha, What's the matter, buddy? You, seem excited. Okay, so we've had Nightmare, Friday, and now The Exorcist. What's next? Okay. Klaatu, Verada, Nikto.
A Conversation of the Footbound.
Why is it that you will not stay with us?
Do you sometimes feel that wherever you may go, there exists no true home for you in this land?
You answered me with a question.
And you ignored my question.
Well then, here's my answer. No. I have always lost parts of my soul to locations. So much so that I do not have very much left to carry around. Which is sad, because now I realize that if I'm ever to find my true home, I shall likely perish in the process. At some point soon, I will plainly disengage and shatter. Therefore, I no longer wish to seek my selfish dream any longer, lest that in attempt to pursue an earthly connection, I lose heavenly connection.
I can understand how that might feel.
How? You have always traveled. If you can feel what I feel, would you not have burnt away the entirety of your soul by now?
I feel that if I'm to seek my true home as you wish to do, I too am liable to perish, though in a different fashion to you.
Which fashion would that be?
In plain honesty, I do not feel that my home is bound in terrestrial boundaries. Therefore, I would perish in the breathless and eternal journey. Something about this earth, something deeply ingrained within human nature, and something engraved onto biological nature, simply feels wrong. To further elaborate would bring forth no clear explanation.
I do not understand. Why can one find fault within nature? It is nature, the most natural righteousness there is. I bid you to try to enlighten me upon your plight.
Very well, as you insist. Though I know not of whether my home exists in celestial worlds, inside infinity, or inside zero, I can hear it calling to me through space-time, in a blue and loving voice that wordlessly whispers, I love you, and you bear love only for me. Search, and you shall never pain forevermore. Of course, it would be impossible to find my home. To search infinity for one minuscule pocket that houses my soul? Ridiculous.
It is not ridiculous. For those who can terrestrially beget their purpose of life find no difficulty, nor doubt in sensing the presence of home being on the same plane as which they would gingerly dance. You, however, have no such senses. Logically, you are not terrestrially bound.
Are you telling me to seek, to submit to infinite wanderlust?
I shall follow.
How can I? I am grounded, whereas my home floats in time.
Incorrect. Your body is grounded, whereas the spirit is capable of flight.
Why do you wish to follow me? You have confirmed that your home is nearby. There's no reason that permits you to err further away from whence you possibly originated.
As I have said, I have little soul to burden my back, and little to worth seeking its resting place. If I may help another, perhaps I shall find purpose. That is, if I cannot satisfy happiness, I shall cause it.
You believe yourself to be unworthy to seek guaranteed asylum. Yet you postulate that I have more value to wander forever, pursuing a half-existence.
I ask of you to exploit whatever small chance you may subtly possess.
And you will guide me on an eternal fruitless journey.
I will view the face of one who may settle eternally.
Shall that suffice for your life?
It shall.
I give you my sincerest gratitude.
We shall depart.
How shall we?
By freeing the spirit to find the soul.
By releasing mind from tangible reality.
Death.
What? Wait, it's you. How'd you get out of the grave in the backyard? Fine. Don't talk to me. This whole night has been ruined. I'm never gonna make it back in time for the watch party. I'm going to miss Halloween, and now I'm stuck here with a ghost that doesn't even want to talk to me! What? No, she's leaving. Great. Let's just see what Miss Creepytails is doing.
Hey, Stormy. So, what's going on? Raven said you're stuck in horror movies or something.
Yeah, I'm stuck, and I'm not sure when I'm gonna make it back. How are the guests doing?
They're good. A little confused, but good. Well, just be careful, Stormy. We'll keep an eye on the viewers until you get back. We've got this.
Alright. Thanks, guys. I'll try to make it back as soon as possible. Alright, let's see what's next.
Silent Death by u/HyberObscura. It was the kind of crime scene that desperately made you wish you could just lock up your daughter at night, you know. Safe and sound. Hide the key. The victim was a mess, is what I'm getting at. Limbs torn off, organs missing, deep bite marks of all shapes and sizes on nearly every revealed extremity. And her eyes were wide open. By that I mean they were split in half. More than likely, a deed performed while the victim was still alive and breathing. And the blood. Man, there's blood. And there's blood. You know, sometimes you wonder how much of the stuff a healthy human being could possibly accommodate without turning into a bloated bag of shifting fluids. The room was drenched, I guess is what I'm saying. Not a single dry surface to be found. I knew it the second that I laid eyes on her. Body fresh, blood still dripping, and a natural aura about the place, like a lingering sensation of evil. I was first on the scene, a couple of uniformed officers showing up not a minute later, and at that point, I knew I had no choice. I knew we couldn't leave. So, I did what anyone would do in my position. In a hushed tone, I told the officers that I suspected that the murderer was still in the house, quite possibly hiding, just waiting for us to leave. My decision to split them up, to send them hunting on their lonesome, is something that I'll have to live with forever. Officer Gordon was the first to fall prey to the silent death. I found him in the basement, hanging from a noose fashioned from his own intestines. His eyes were bulbous orbs, a death stare of unimaginable horror. I shook my head, swallowing down chunky pieces of my half-digested meatball sandwich. What a way to go. Still fairly quick, though, I'd imagine. Officer McKenna wasn't so lucky. It probably took him several minutes to bleed out from the wound of missing, genitalia. He tried to scream, I suspect, but she made damn well sure to puncture his lungs as well before removing them completely post-mortem. I found the half-chewed remains in the kitchen, a trail of bits and pieces of both officers, soon leading me directly to her. "Hi there, Pumpkin," I said, running my fingers through her blood-stained hair. "It's way past your bedtime." "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered apologetically. "I was just so hungry." I smiled and kissed her forehead. "It's okay, sweetie," I said. "Papa's got you."
What? Ugh. Great. Now I'm stuck in some kind of dirty bathroom.
I want to play a game.
Aha! Joke's on you, Jigsaw. I've got the perfect solution for your little game. No, not there yet. Okay. Aha! Suck it, John!
Have you ever wanted to learn about stalkers and why they do what they do? Well, aren't you in luck? Because you're talking to one right now. For the sake of keeping my identity a secret, you can call me Clown, since my signature gimmick is to wear clown masks when I break into people's homes. Now, before you start assuming I'm some sort of violent monster, you need to understand that I have two basic rules. Number one, I don't hurt anyone I stalk. And number two, I steal one mildly inconvenient item from them, add it to my collection, and then never stalk them again. I do my best to make sure that the people I'm stalking don't know that I'm doing it. The worst emotional stress they deal with is being upset they misplaced something. Not that their life is in danger because some psycho is following them around. At this point, I imagine you think I'm about to admit that I'm a stalker because of some dark, troubled past. I hate to say it, but I'm not that interesting. Simply put, I'm bored. I am so fucking bored, it's unreal. I live in a microscopic town in the middle of bumblefuck nowhere. The kind of town where there's only two hobbies, which are going to church and crystal meth, both of which do not appeal to me in the slightest. So to deal with this boredom, I started collecting items from different homes and creating a collection. I'm not an expert at this, but I managed to get a few items. I've mostly collected electrical tools from people who like to build stuff as a hobby, sports equipment from people who regularly play sports, for example, a single shin guard so they can't project both legs, and 3 different remote controls from people who sit around watching TV all day. I won't lie, I am a little proud of myself and what I've managed to achieve so far. And I know for personal safety, not being caught or seen is a good thing, but there is a small part of me that wishes that someone saw me as I was running away from a house after stealing something. I think becoming something of a local legend would bring a little life to this dead-end town. But I think the fact that no one notices what I do is for the best. As a matter of fact, after 3 weeks of following one of our local mailmen, I was able to figure out his routine and swipe the blades off his lawnmower. His yard is slowly getting out of hand, so it's only a matter of time before he figures it out. The best part is that I was able to figure out his schedule when he mows his yard, so I get a chance to see that stupid look on his face when he realizes. That night, I added the lawnmower blades to my collection and went to sleep. But when I woke, I noticed something that shouldn't have been terrifying, but it absolutely chilled me to the core. The second pillow I had on my bed was replaced with a red rose. I sat up in bed, slowly trying to wrap my head around what I was looking at. After a few seconds, I realized that someone broke into my house and replaced my pillow with a rose. I jumped out of bed and scanned my room. I didn't see anyone, but that still didn't stop me from grabbing my bat and walking around the house. As I went through the house, I started noticing more roses. One rose was next to a single shoe I had, the other shoe being replaced with a rose. The middle cushion on my couch was gone, so now I have an awkward gap in the middle of where I watch TV. I'm even missing my mouse on my laptop, which now has a fucking rose shoved in the USB port. In total, I counted 12 roses. Whoever broke into my house somehow managed to take 12 items from my house in just one night while I was asleep. As I was trying to wrap my head around what just happened, I heard a knock at the door. I opened the door to see a woman who I will be calling Cheryl, a local woman who does everything in her power to be up in everybody's business. I actually still have her blender. I don't use it, mine is better, but it's nice to know I managed to steal something from the nosiest person I've ever met. As soon as I opened the door, she immediately asked me if I'd found any roses laying around my house. I decided it would be for the best to lie and say no. Cheryl looked me in the eyes and said, "Well, young man, several houses have found items from their homes stolen and replaced with roses. We're having an emergency meeting at the Baptist church tomorrow at 10 a.m. Be sure to be there so we can figure out a way to catch this thief." For the first time in my life, I felt someone gave me a good reason to go to church. As I was sitting in that church, I couldn't believe what my ears were hearing. Entire cars having all 4 tires stolen and replaced with roses? Refrigerator doors, completely removed with roses inside the fridges, with defrosting food. And how in God's name do you steal an entire king-size bed and no one catches that? Multiple people, all having 12 items stolen from them, all of which happened in the last 3 days? The idea that this was completed by just one person just sounded insane. This has to be a group of people all hitting the houses at once, right? Out of nowhere, I noticed a young woman in her late 20s sit down next to me. To protect her identity and my own, I'm gonna call her Rose.
So, a clown mask. That's cute.
I didn't even know what to say to that. How did this person know that I was also a stalker? Was I so careless to not notice her watching me? While I was trying to make sense of everything, the church doors flung open, and a woman started screaming at the top of her lungs that her husband was stolen. "What could make you say that?" said the pastor. She told the church that laying on her bed was a single rose right next to her husband's wedding ring. As the church went silent, Rose leaned in and whispered in my ear,
I gotta say, you have a lot of learning to do, but I'm so glad I found someone who knows how to have fun in this town.
Shower? Why am I in a shower? No, I can go for the Horcrux.
The Rake. During the summer of 2003, events in the northeastern United States involving a strange, human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little or no information was left intact, as most online and written accounts of the creature were mysteriously destroyed, primarily focused in rural New York State, and once found in Idaho. Self-proclaimed witness told stories of their encounters with a creature of unknown origin. Emotions ranged from extremely tragic levels of fright and discomfort to almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remain powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. In early 2006, the collaboration had occurred nearly 24 documents dating between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 centuries. In almost all cases, the stories were identical. I've been in contact with a member of this group and was able to get some excerpts from their upcoming book, A Suicide Note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it is necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once, I awoke from his presence. And once I awoke and saw his form, once again I awoke and heard his voice and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Lenny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry, translated from Spanish, 1880. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand. I will not sleep. His voice. Unintelligible text. A Mariner's Log, 1961. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed, I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again, at the request of the rake. From a witness, 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. About 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used that moment to steal back the sheet, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him I thought he had got out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet from the end of the bed so quickly his knees almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for a half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there is what appeared to be a naked man, or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked in the fetal position, occasionally glancing up at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed, and then crawled quickly in the falling sort of motion right along the bed until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, or probably closer to 5, just seemed like a while. Just looking at my husband, the creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway leading to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the rake." My husband drove his car into the lake that night. While rushing our daughter to the hospital, they did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in hotels near my parents' house, After we decided to return home, began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of the other 2 people in New York who had seen the creature we now refer to as the Rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small connection of what we believed to be the accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history, or followed up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages, and never mentioned it again. A ship log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the Rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the Rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed. Each day when I woke up, by the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep, while blurring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. This still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the Rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and now I believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recorder immediately brings back that to memory. The thoughts that must have been going through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the Rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room when I slept. I know, and fear that one night, I'll wake up to see him staring at me.
Oh, hey, it's raining again. Oh, finally. Well, Stormy, let's see what movie you got yourself into.
Hey, Stormy?
Nope. Cthulhu, let this be the right one.
Mr. Widemouth by Perfect Circle 35. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I was in college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belongs to various homes we lived in when I was much younger. Most of the memories are unclear and pointless. Chasing after another boy in the backyard of my house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on a creek behind the apartments we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were made yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by my long sickness I experienced that spring. But in my heart, I know they are real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vane, Maine, population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space. But it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mom brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next 3 weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I had been diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was so large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. "You kind of look like a Furby," I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look.
"Furby? What's a Furby?"
he asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy? The little robot with the big ears. You can pet and feed them, almost like a real pet?"
"Oh."
Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity.
"You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend."
I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check in on me.
"I lay under your bed,"
he later explained.
"I don't want your parents to see me, because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore."
We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and the pictures they contained. The third or fourth day after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face.
"I have a new game we can play,"
he said.
"We have to wait until your mother comes to check on you, because she can't see us to play it. It's a secret game."
After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand.
"We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway,"
he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission. But Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from the angle the drop was no further than 2 stories due to the incline.
"I like to play pretend up here,"
Mr. Widemouth explained.
"I pretend that there's a big, soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try."
I was 5 years old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibilities. "It's a long drop," I said.
"But that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if there was only a short drop. If it were that way, you might as well just bounce on a real trampoline."
I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. "Maybe some other time," I said. "I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt." Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment.
"If you say so,"
he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box.
I want to teach you how to juggle,
he said.
Here are some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons.
I looked in the box. It was full of knives. My parents will kill me, I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room. Objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. I'll be spanked and grounded for a year. Mr. Widemouth frowned.
It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it.
I pushed the box away. I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night, saying that he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mom came to me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined to my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of the sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me.
I have something I want you to see,
he said. I must have given him a weird look because he then said,
It's safe, I promise.
I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail which ran through the woods behind the house.
This is an important path,
he explained.
I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there.
I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond that trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he said otherwise. For this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. Early enough for you? My father asked with a hint of sympathy. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. This is the last move, son. I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends. I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house had burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had showed me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belonged to children.
Damn it! What have I gotten myself this time? Just hope it's not really this late.
This tale the sacristan of the Church of St. Eulalie at Neuville-d'Amont told me, as we sat under the arbor of the White Horse one fine summer evening, drinking a bottle of old wine to the health of the dead man, now very much at his ease, whom that very morning he had borne to the grave with full honors, beneath a pall powdered with small silver tears.
My poor father, who is dead,
it is the sacristan who is speaking,
was in his lifetime a gravedigger. He was of an agreeable disposition, the result, no doubt, of the calling he followed, for it has often been pointed out that the people who work in cemeteries are of a jovial turn. Death has no terrors for them. They never give it a thought. I, for instance, monsieur, enter a cemetery at night as little perturbed as though it were the arbor of the White Horse. And if by chance I meet with a ghost, I don't disturb myself in the least about it, for I reflect that he may just as likely have business of his own to attend to as I. I know the habits of the dead, and I know their character. Indeed, so far as that goes, I know things of which the priests themselves are ignorant. If I were to tell you all I have seen, you would be astounded. But a still tongue makes a wise head, and my father, who, all the same, delighted in spinning a yarn, did not disclose a 20th part of what he knew. To make up for this, he often repeated the same stories, and to my knowledge, he told the story of Catherine Fontaine at least 100 times. Catherine Fontaine was an old maid whom he well remembered having seen when he was a mere child. I should not be surprised if there were still, perhaps, 3 old fellows in the district who could remember having heard folks speak of her, for she was very well known and of excellent reputation, though poor enough. She lived at the corner of the Rue Anon, in the turret which is still to be seen there, and which formed a part of an old, half-ruined mansion looking on to the garden of the Ursuline nuns. On that turret can still be traced certain figures and half-obliterated inscriptions. The late curé of St. Eulalie, Monsieur Levasseur, asserted that there are the words in Latin, "Love is stronger than death," which is to be understood, so he would add, of divine love. Catherine Fontaine lived by herself in this tiny apartment. She was a lace maker. You know, of course, that the lace made in our part of the world was formerly held in high esteem. No one knew anything of her relatives or friends. It was reported that when she was 18 years of age, she had loved the young Chevalier de Montclair, and had been secretly affianced to him. But decent folk didn't believe a word of it, and said it was nothing but a tale concocted because Catherine Fontaine's demeanor was that of a lady rather than that of a working woman, and because, moreover, she possessed beneath her white locks the remains of great beauty. Her expression was sorrowful, and on one finger she wore one of those rings fashioned by the goldsmith into the semblance of 2 tiny hands clasped together. In former days, folks were accustomed to exchange such rings at their betrothal ceremony. I am sure you know the sort of thing I mean. Catherine Fontaine lived a saintly life. She spent a great deal of time in churches,
And every morning, whatever might be the weather, she went to assist at the 6 o'clock Mass at St. Eulalie. Now one December night, whilst she was in her little chamber, she was awakened by the sound of bells, and nothing doubting that they were the ringing for the first Mass, the pious woman dressed herself and came downstairs and out into the street. The night was so obscure that not even the walls of the houses were visible, and not a ray of light shone from the murky sky. And such was the silence amid this black darkness that there was not even the sound of a distant dog barking, and the feeling of aloofness from every living creature was perceptible. But Catherine Fontaine knew well every single stone she stepped on, and as she could have found her way to the church with her eyes shut, she reached without difficulty the corner of the Rue Anon and the Rue de la Paroisse, where the timbered house stands with the tree of Jesse carved on one of its massive beams. When she reached this spot, she perceived that the church doors were open, and that a great light was streaming out from the wax tapers. She resumed her journey, and when she had passed through the porch, she found herself in the midst of a vast congregation which entirely filled the church. But she did not recognize any of the worshippers, and was surprised to observe that all of these people were dressed in velvets and brocades, with feathers in their hats, and they wore swords in the fashions of days gone by. Here were gentlemen who carried tall canes with gold knobs, and ladies with lace caps fastened with coronet-shaped combs. Chevaliers of the Order of St. Louis extended their hands to these ladies, who concealed behind their fans painted faces, of which only the powdered brow and the patch at the corner of the eye were visible. All of them proceeded to take their places without the slightest sound, and as they moved, neither the sound of their footsteps on the pavement nor the rustle of their garments could be heard. The lower places were filled with a crowd of young artisans in brown jackets, dimity breeches, and blue stockings, with their arms around the waists of pretty blushing girls who lowered their eyes. Near the holy water stoops, peasant women in scarlet petticoats and laced bodices sat upon the ground as immovable as domestic animals, whilst young lads, standing up behind them, stared out from wide-open eyes and twirled their hats round and round on their fingers. And all these sorrowful countenances seemed centered irremovably on one and the same thought, at once sweet and sorrowful. On her knees in her accustomed place, Catherine Fontaine saw the priest advance toward the altar, preceded by 2 servers. She recognized neither priest nor clerks. The Mass began. It was a silent Mass, during which neither the sound of the moving lips nor the tinkle of the bell was audible. Catherine Fontaine felt that she was under the observation and the influence also of her mysterious neighbor, and when, scarcely turning her head, she stole a glance at him, she recognized the young Chevalier de Montclair, who had once loved her and who had been dead for 45 years. She recognized him by a small mark which he had over the left ear, and above all by the shadow which his long black eyelashes cast upon his cheeks. He was dressed in his hunting clothes, scarlet with gold lace, the very clothes he wore that day when he met her in St. Leonard's Wood, begged of her a drink, and stole a kiss. He had preserved his youth and good looks. When he smiled, he still displayed magnificent teeth. Catherine said to him in an undertone,
"Monseigneur, you who were my friend, and to whom in days gone by I gave all that a girl holds most dear, may God keep you in his grace. Oh, that he would at length inspire me with regret for the sin I committed in yielding to you. For it is a fact that, though my hair is white and I approach my end, I have not yet repented of having loved you. But, dear dead friend and noble Signor, tell me, who are these folk, habited after the antique fashion who are here assisting at this silent mass.
The Chevalier de Montclair replied in a voice feebler than death, but nonetheless crystal clear.
Catherine, these men and women are souls from purgatory who have grieved God by sinning as we ourselves sin through the love of the creature, but who are not on that account cast off by God, inasmuch as their sin, like ours, was not deliberate. While separated from those whom they loved upon earth, they are purified in the cleansing fires of purgatory. They suffer the pangs of absence, which is for them the most cruel of tortures. They are so unhappy that an angel from heaven takes pity upon their love torment. By the permission of the Most High, for 1 hour in the night, he reunites each year a lover till loved in their parish church, where they are permitted to assist the mass of shadows, hand clasped in hand. These are the facts. If it has been granted to me to see thee before thy death, Catherine, and is a boon which is bestowed by God's special permission.
And Catherine answered him,
I would die gladly enough, dear dead lord, if I might recover the beauty that was mine when I gave you to drink in the forest.
Whilst they thus conversed under their breath, a very old canon was taking the collection and proffering to the worshippers a great copper dish, wherein they let fall, each in his turn, ancient coins which have long since ceased to pass current. A coup of 6 livres, florins, ducats and ducatoons, Jacobuses and rose nobles, and the pieces fell silently into the dish. When at length it was placed before the Chevalier, he dropped into it a louis which made no more sound than had the other pieces of gold and silver. Then the old canon stopped before Catherine Fontaine, who fumbled in her pocket without being able to find a farthing. Then, being unwilling to allow the dish to pass without an offering from herself, she slipped off her finger the ring which the Chevalier had given her the day before his death, and cast it into the copper bowl. As the golden ring fell, a sound like the heavy clang of a bell rang out, and on the stroke of this reverberation the Chevalier, the canon, the celebrant, the servers, the ladies and their chevaliers, the whole assembly vanished utterly. The candles guttered out, and Catherine Fontaine was left alone in the darkness.
Having concluded his narrative after this fashion, the sacristan drank a long draught of wine, remained pensive for a moment, and then resumed his talk in these words.
I have told this tale exactly as my father told it to me over and over again, and I believe that it is authentic, because it agrees in all respects with what I have observed of the manner and customs peculiar to those who have passed away. I have associated a good deal with the dead ever since my childhood, and I know that they are accustomed to return to what they have loved. It is on this account that the miserly dead wander at night in the neighborhood of the treasures they conceal during their lifetime. They keep a strict watch over their gold, but the trouble they give themselves, far from being of service to them, turns to their disadvantage. And it is not a rare thing to come upon money buried in the ground on digging in a place haunted by a ghost. In the same way, deceased husbands come by night to harass their wives who have made a second matrimonial venture, and I could easily name several who have kept a better watch over their wives since their death than they ever did while living. That sort of thing is blameworthy, for in all fairness, the dead have no business to stir up jealousies. Still, I do but tell you what I have observed myself. It is a matter to take into account if one marries a widow. Besides, the tale I have told you is vouchsafed for in the manner following. The morning after that extraordinary night, Catherine Fontaine was discovered dead in her chamber, and the beadle attached to St. Eulalie found in the copper bowl used for collection a gold ring with 2 clasped hands. Besides, I'm not the kind of man to make jokes, Suppose we order another bottle of wine?
Damn it! I'm never going to make it back. Of all nights, why tonight? Well, like Sisyphus, I am bound to hell. Well, guess if I'm stuck here, I might as well do what I do moderately okayest. Oh, hey, Blair Witch. I love that movie. Would you like to hear a story? Well, I'm gonna read one regardless. One of my favorites. Room Zero by Amateur Tess. It's been a while since I've written anything else related to the Disney Corporation, and I'm sure you can understand why. A lot has been going on since my last post. I've received a lot of questions and concerns from folks who read my first-hand account of Mowgli's Palace, a resort that was built and abandoned by Disney. I want to thank everyone who mirrored my post. It's been taken down from a few places, mostly corporate sites that are easily leaned on by a larger power. However, for every nuked topic or disappearing blog post, it seems like 100 more have popped up. And this is something that they'll have to face. There's no turning back for them, and none for me either. I'm definitely being followed. For the first month or two, I chalked it up to paranoia. Any casual glance or half smile in my direction set me off. Hairs standing on the back of my neck and everything. The first one, or rather, the first one I was actually able to spot, was a telephone worker milling around in my apartment complex. He was middle-aged, doughy, dressed just as you'd expect, but something just seemed off about him. I couldn't place it, but I knew this wasn't just my imagination acting up. He was awkward and out of place, not somebody who was comfortable doing his routine job. I followed him around a corner, only to lose him there. And then when I turned back to go home, there he was, staring directly at me, about 10 feet behind me, expressionless and cold. "Exploring?" he asked. That was all he said. And there was this accusing tone to his voice. Tell me, what blue-collar phone jockey does that? I guess that's the worst part. Never feeling safe. Never feeling alone. That and the occasional Disney merchandise left somewhere for me to find. Little rubber Mickeys in the mailbox, a Disney Adventures magazine on my bookshelf. They hide little Mickeys everywhere. 3 circles, one big, 2 small, and the silhouette of the famous mouse's head. I've started keeping a running list of Mickeys I've found. Coffee cup rings on my coffee table, one big, 2 small. Colored glass bottles left on the doorstep, viewed from the top down, all red. And graffiti on the wall on my way to work, a huge earth, small sun and moon in the proper locations. They're everywhere. People have emailed me about this as well. If you repost anything I have to say, you're going to start finding those son of a bitch outlines. I guarantee it. The best one, by far, one that actually made me laugh because of the horror of it all, was a drawing in chalk next to my car. I was taken aback at first, walking through the parking garage, keeping an eye out for people following me. The outline seemed a perfect match for, well, a murder victim you're probably familiar with. if you've read my past posts. Written in yellow paint, I'm sure, was a single word. Retract. The only good thing that has come out of all of this is that I know I'm not the only one who's seen something they shouldn't have. I'm not going to give their names because, well, if I have to tell you why, then you haven't been paying attention. Researcher goes to Disney parks whenever he can. All throughout the year. He's not going to have fun, enjoy the rides, etc. He's going there looking for the Mascots. And there's been a long tradition, apparently, of people reporting strange patrons throughout the park. Silent, motionless, staring patrons of every age, shape, size. Men, women, adults, children, and teens. All wearing Disney-themed gas masks. Way back when, Disney would get a ton of complaints about oddly dressed folks following others around the park. Folks who would then merge into the crowds and disappear. Later on, the gas masks caused folks to draw their own conclusions, and reports of possible terrorists and bombers started following. All those reports, most likely, went straight into the trash can. I know I can't find any sign of any such occasions reported on by the media, although you should be aware of the fact that Disney can pretty much control the press like no other. So researcher goes to the parks, talks to a few people, and tries not to draw any attention to himself. He'll just ask 3 or 4 families if they've seen his friend, who's wearing a funny mask. He has yet to see a Mascot for himself, though on one occasion, a child pointed him toward Frontier Town. As he raced through the crowd, he heard a single voice cry out, "Mommy, I want a goofy air mask too." A fellow I'll call lifeguard worked in a Disney water park from 2001 to 2003. He stood at the top of a huge water slide and made sure none of the kids got too rowdy. He passed the kids through one at a time, telling them over and over again to be safe, keep their arms in, and so on. One day, as he tells it, this fat kid goes down a tube and doesn't come out the other end. He sent 2 or 3 kids after. The whole thing moves on at a steady clip. So naturally, if you'd expect, if he got stuck, and the kids that followed him were stuck too. Not so. Only the big kid disappears. Everyone else comes out at the other end, cheering and splashing like nothing's wrong. The lifeguard shuts down the slide, much to the aggravation of the kids waiting. Before he can go through any of Disney's strict procedures, splash. The kid finally comes out. Staff members pulled the kid out of the water, and he sank like a stone when he hit. His skin already blue and his eyes wide. All he would say was, "No face, kids," and "Stop squeezing." The kid was okay, in case you were wondering. He got carted off right to the medical center. And when lifeguard was told to open the slide back up, he made a big stink about how it clearly wasn't safe. Despite his complaints, he was threatened with firing and, begrudgingly, opened up the slide again. And from that point on, he kept a closer eye on the kids. Every so often, they'd come out in the wrong order. Never as stunned as the fat kid was, but always with a vague look of concern. A dreamy half-stupor that seemed as if they were trying to figure out what was reality. They'd take on some water and choke a bit, and they'd never come back up to ride again. I read his emails with that same sort of unease you might be feeling right now. I wanted him to share his own story, but in the end, he didn't want to expose himself in that way. I can't say that I blame him. Snow White, which wasn't the actual role she played, was a character in the park. She had a nice little tidbit for me. Do you know what happens when a costumed employee drops dead in his suit? Like, 1 second he's taking a picture with little Jimmy, and the next he's had a fatal stroke. a second costumed mascot in the area has to sit with the corpse on a curb or bench and wait for a designated dry cleaner to arrive and cart the body away in a discreet manner. All the while, patrons have no idea they're sitting with a dead body for photo ops. So, feel free to check your photo albums at this point. And that was bad, but another fellow, janitor, went completely off the creepy charts. Disney World, and probably others, is built with a series of underground tunnels just below your feet. 3 stories worth. Anything and everything you can imagine is down there for use of the employees. They're called utilidors, utility corridors. Basically, that's the reason you don't see characters out of place or janitors wandering throughout the park. They pop in and out of hidden doors and travel a concealed town you're walking on. Janitor told me something that might be common knowledge, but was nonetheless news to me. Walt Disney had several apartments built in his parks. There was one above Cinderella's castle, there's one in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and they're all over the place. More than that, there are nightclubs, a movie theater, a bowling alley, and much more. All behind doors built right into the whimsical facades you've passed by without a second look. Club 22 is one such area. If you have the cash to join this exclusive club, trust me, you don't, then you'll have access to it and much more. Club 22 is a place where anything goes. The Disney Corporation calls these places dark zones. Spots where the squeaky clean visage of Mickey Mouse gives way to drinking, drugs, and, yes, sex. Conversely, the rest of the park is the bright zone, with a few gray zone utilidors between. As far as Janitor has said, it wasn't always that way. It was more of a slow decline in the gradual relaxation of social norms within that elite group. And the reason he knows all of this, which you might have already guessed, is he's cleaned it. After a lengthy background check and a non-disclosure form, Janitor moved up from a park attendant to one of the dark zone cleaning crew. Now, before you get some satanic human sacrifice vision in your head, Janitor saw nothing of the sort. Lots of empty alcohol bottles. Yeah, used condoms scattered around like a deflated New Year's balloon. And then, hell, he's cleaned up his share of blood, piss, and vomit, but it was all down to the unrestricted behavior of patrons as opposed to any sort of cult behavior. At least that's how he sees it in retrospect. All that trash, that profane shit, went into a furnace and mingled with the smoke of a quaint cottage's chimney. If you've been to Disney World, then you've breathed ultra-condensed sin. Backing up this information was Hammer. Hammer mailed me the old-fashioned way, though I don't know how he got my home address. He sent me photocopies of work papers providing his employment, with instruction to burn them when I was convinced, which I gladly did. Hammer worked around the Disney World park, doing demolition and construction. At one point, he approached a superior regarding some strange construction plans. There was a wide, rectangular area marked off on the blueprints, about the size of a supermarket. The area was left unnamed and only bore the words, "Do not dig." Not only was his superior in the dark, but he was super fucking purposefully in the dark. He didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to know about it, and ended the conversation with this space intentionally left blank. Hammer didn't get it. The area seemed a waste of space, and it was directly conflicting with the work his team had been given. So he started poking around in the area on his time off, finding only a derelict steel door and a great span of concrete just beyond. It was a supermarket's worth of blank gray floor. Soon after, Hammer started picking gascots out of the crowds. Unlike all the other reports, the people, the things, would stand in full view of the guy. They'd cluster together in the distance, or they'd be just pressed against a wall when he turned a corner. He said they moved weird. Like they were weak or injured. Like a deer that's been run down by a hunter and can't flee anymore. The gas masks. The Disney characters' faces with filters jammed in. He noted that they seemed wet on the inside. Like condensation on a car window. Tiny beads of water glimmered behind the glass, making it impossible for any of them to actually see. Probing further, Hammer started asking questions of anyone and everyone who had been working in the park for a decade or more. He hit dead ends throughout, until he was directed to Ida, an elderly woman who worked in a restaurant on Main Street. She'd been there since way back, and though nobody had the balls to ask directly, everyone knew she had terrible stories to tell. Hammer asked about the empty space, and then about the gas masked customers. And at first he thought he would receive the same non-answers that he had gotten so far. She was quiet. Eerily quiet. "Room 0, she croaked. A single shaking hand placed to her cheek as if she was a little girl fearing for a father's punishment. She didn't meet the man's gaze for the entire conversation. Room 0, as it turned out, was yet another hidden room just like the apartments in Club 22. However, its sheer size and its spot deep beneath the park set it apart from any of the fun, dark zones. It was a bomb shelter. Room 0 was built to withstand a massive attack, be it conducted by foreign or domestic enemies. Room 0 was to be stocked with enough rations to feed the entire park's average number of patrons at any given moment, and housed a smaller, yet lavish, panic room of sorts for Disney higher-ups. During World War II, official Disney gas masks were actually produced for children to wear in the event of an attack. The idea was that it would be less scary for kids if Mickey's face was emblazoned on the wartime safety device. Yes, I know the obvious problems with that. During the Cold War scares of the 60s, when Disney World was constructed, Room 0 was stocked with similar masks as well. Whether they cared about the fears of children or just callous branding, things found their way down there. What's more, some genius decided that kids would then be frightened by the gas masks their parents wore, so all masks, adult and children, were made to comply to this insane standard. Ida described it as treating a wound with lemon juice. None of this explained what Hammer had been seeing, though. Not only the seemingly supernatural appearances, but the emptied-out room as well. "I've been there," he explained. "There's nothing but a cement floor and 4 walls." "No." Ida shook her head and covered her mouth, stifling a sob. "You've been on top of it." Someone or something sounded the alarm one day. When the park was at full capacity, the warning was clear. It was supposedly an air attack. Security ushered everyone down into the tremendous shelter. There they were ordered to put on their masks and hunker down for the duration of the assault. Everything was quiet for about 30 minutes, save for the crying children and the frightened whispers. No one wanted to die, and so they were thankful, in a way, for this strange measure of safety. And then, the first scream rang out. "Hey!" a man shouted. "Quit pinching!" Waves of shrieks and yells rippled through the crowd from one wall to another, back and forth. "Who's running around? Settle down," someone hollered. "Who's laughing? This isn't funny." "Ow, who stepped on my foot?" Despite security guards urging to calm down and keep their cool, the whole crowd became more and more agitated until, finally, after nearly an hour of madness, the lights flickered and then died. What followed could only have been described as utter chaos. In the dark, only the wails of the young and the anguished cries of adults could be heard in a massive, swelling din that bloodied the ears of all within that black echo chamber. A group of staff members and a select few of patrons made it out of the door, ready to face the war above rather than the insanity below. What they found, of course, was a desolate, yet untouched theme park. The music continued to play, echoing through silent storybook towns. Upon returning to Room 0, the few who stood at the top of the steel staircase that led down to the pitch-black darkness heard no sign of the previous fray. There was only silence. Ida herself descended that staircase despite the begging of those she left above. She reached the reinforced doors, herself now awash in the darkness, and hearing only the buzzing in her ears. And then a single voice came out of the darkness. The echo made it impossible to tell whether the mocking, raspy voice was at the back of the bomb shelter, or if it was right in front of her face.
Shut the door, dear. You're letting out the cold.
Gripped by terror, she did just that. Within days, the entire thing, shelter, staircase, all of it, was covered with feet upon feet of cement. Air systems and generators above its ceiling were removed, creating the large, empty space. They're all still down there, Ida told Hammer. Down there with whoever that was. You might have noticed that I've used Ida's name. Unfortunately, she passed away soon after telling her story. An accidental fall, supposedly, after getting out of bed to turn on a light. Such a company devotee, the paper reported. That her entire bedroom was covered with Mickey silhouettes. Wait a minute. I found it! How did I not think about this before? Okay, it's just a jump to the left, and a step to the right. With your hands on your hips, bring your knees in tight, but it's a pelvic thrust that really drives you insane. Let's do the time warp again. I can't believe it. I made it back. Oh shit, the watch party. I missed it. Damn it. Hey guys, sorry,
Stormy, are you okay?
Yeah, we were worried you might have died.
Yeah, I'm alright, but I missed the watch party. And Halloween.
Stormy, we're just glad you're okay.
Thanks, guys.
Besides, everyone loved the stories.
Yeah, dude, they were a bit rowdy at times, but they had fun.
Well, that's good. I'm glad we were able to still tell some terrifying tales tonight.
I have an idea. We still have a little bit of Halloween left. I think we have enough time for one more story.
Definitely.
You know what? I think that sounds wonderful. How about it? How about we round off this year's Halloween Scarathon with one more tale of terror? Good. I hope you all enjoy. Candle Cove by Chris Straub. Does anyone remember this kids show? It was called Candle Cove, and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 1972. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember that it was on a weird time, like 4 p.m.
It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland, and I was 9 years old in 72. Candle Cove. Was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl.
Yes, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, really low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll. It looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was on. I don't think it was WTSF, though.
Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean, Skyshale. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple of months in 71 and not 72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was Channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called Laughingstock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was calliope music constantly playing. I don't remember the girl's name. Janice or Jade or something. I think it was Janice.
Thank you, Jaren. Memories flooded back when you mentioned the Laughingstock and Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea, and it had an awful Ed Wynn voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked.
I remember now, too. Do you remember this part, Skyshale? You have to go inside.
Mike, I got chills reading that. Yeah, I remember. That was what the ship always told Percy when the area was a spooky place he had to go in. Like a cave or a dark room wherever the treasure was. And the camera would push in on the Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his 2 eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw on the fishing line that opened and closed it. Ugh. It just looked so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above a really tall, narrow teeth.
I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when the show was on. Nightmare fuel.
That wasn't the villain, the puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on the top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he had only one eye, but yeah, the villain was another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then.
Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker. What kind of kids show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings. Just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape. And his glass eyes were too big for his skull. Christ almighty.
Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin?
Yeah, I think so. Remember, his mouth didn't open and close. His jaw just slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl, but at the camera and said, "To grind your skin."
I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory. A bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, and the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were all just screaming. And the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically and all just screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying that she had been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare, and I used to wet the bed when I had it.
I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that was an episode.
No, that's not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean, literally just standing in place, crying and screaming for the whole show.
Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear to God I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed.
Oh God, yes! The little girl, Janice. I remember seeing her shake, and the Skin Taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw careening so wildly that I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off, and it was the last time I watched. I ran to tell my brother, and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on.
I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was little in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, and if she remembered a kid's show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why. She said because I used to think it was so strange that you said, "I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove now, Mom," and then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show.
Thank you all so much. You really helped make tonight something wonderful.
No problem, Stormy.
Have a good night.
I love them. And if any of you haven't already, please make sure to go check out all of their channels. They will all be linked down below. And thank you all so much for being here for this year's Halloween Scarathon. I hope you had a good time. Thank Cthulhu that I still have all my limbs and there doesn't seem to be any long-term ramifications of tonight's events. Wait, no! Come on! Not you again! Wait, where are you going? What? Go. Okay, fine. You can stay, but no creepy ghost shit. Well, everyone, thank you all again so much for coming. You all have no idea just how much you mean to me. So, everyone, have a wonderful night, and I hope to see you in the next video, if we all survive. Seriously, go check them all